and get started. And Amber, do you want to come up to the witness seat? And if you introduce yourself, and have we met you? Have we all met you? Have you met all of us? I know individually we've spoken, but.
Yes, I've been watching. So I know all of you individually from that. But my name is Amber Perry. I'm newly in this position with Vermont Farm Bureau as policy director. I've been with them for about a year now, but only 19 days in this position. So take it easy on me. So today we hope to give you a little bit of information about who we are, what we do as an organization. And I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to meet with us. We're joined by the president, Joe Tisbert. He'll be joining by Zoom, our vice president, Mary White, and our second vice president, Art Whitman. So we can start if you guys want to go around, and then we can jump in with our history, or. Sure, yeah. Yeah, since you do have some folks who we haven't met. And is everybody already in the room? The three guests. Okay, good. I'm David Durfee. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm from Shaftesbury and represent Shaftesbury and Glastonbury and part of Sunderland. And why don't we just go around and.
Rodney Graham, represent Orange 3, which is Williamstown and Washington, Williamstown and Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, represent Lamoille County, District 1, Stowe.
Henry Pearl, I represent Danville, Peacham, and Cabot.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, which is Linden, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
I'm David Templeman, Orleans 3, which is Orleans Village, Barton, Brownington, and Westmore.
Josie Levitt, Grandel Chittenden, which is all of Grandel County and a little bit of West Milton.
Mike Rice, Bennington, Rutland, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, which is Royalton and Tunbridge.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
Heather Supernat, Vice Chair, represent Windsor 4, which is Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
We've got our committee assistant. Some of you may not be able to see her behind the desk in the corner, but Laura Rich, who gets things organized for us. And so, yeah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we'll let you begin. And if there are questions along the way, how would you like to handle that? We can have you speak and then hold all questions, or if there are questions people can ask me and I'll interrupt.
Yeah, there's 4 of us presenting, so if we want to just hold the questions until after each of us present, that would be fine.
Okay, great.
I can give you a little about myself. I guess I'll start. I'm Amber. I live in East Montpelier with my family. When I'm not doing Farm Bureau stuff, we are on a farm in our town. I work at their market. My kids are involved in their 4-H. So we're not at home. Chances are we're at the farm. That is Art Whitman. He's our second vice president, and he will give us the information about our organization, a little bit of history.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I'm Art Whitman. I'm the president of the Bennington County Farm Bureau, and I'm also second vice president of the Vermont State Farm Bureau organization. I want to congratulate Mr. Durfee on being appointed chairman of this, what I think is the most prestigious organization up in Montpelier, because of what you're contending with the farms and all that sort of stuff. Mr. Durfee lives in Shaftesbury, where I am the chairman of the select board, and I rely on him constantly for input on when we have town issues and that sort of stuff. And I'm hoping that he'll do the same for me when he has questions about agriculture, Farm Bureau, and so on and so forth. So please. Vermont Farm Bureau is the oldest agricultural organization in Vermont, and we are probably the largest. We are 1,700 members strong. We are also part of a bigger organization called the American Farm Bureau, and that is the largest in the country, representing agriculture. It's actually the largest lobbying organization in the country. Farm Bureau represents all aspects of agriculture. It isn't just one thing like the dairying or organic or anything else like that. In fact, our president, Joe Tisbert, is the owner of a commercial organic vegetable operation, a large one, in fact. So again, we represent all aspects of agriculture. One of the a group that hasn't been represented very much and is now being represented by us is the horse people, horse owners throughout the state, organizations and that sort of stuff. So again, we represent all aspects of agriculture. I'm going to let Mary White explain to you how policies are made. You've met Amber. She will, when somebody asks her a question, how does Vermont Farm Bureau stand on this? She just doesn't pull what she thinks is. There's actually a policy book, and Amber will be explaining, or Mary will be explaining that to you, how she comes up with this. Almost all of the magazines or Vermont magazines or newspapers that you pick up now has got articles about how somebody came in from out of state, bought a small farm and started making cheeses, making soaps, that sort of stuff, which is very important that we keep the landscape open and all that sort of stuff. But I don't want to let us lose track of what is really the big moneymaker for the state of Vermont, which is the large farmers, and especially in the dairy industry. We feel that we are kind of like under the when I'm talking about large farms, we're under the microscope. We almost feel like we're on the defensive all the time. I grew up, my grandfather had a large farm, or a fairly large farm at the time, 60 cows. That's back in the 50s and 60s. So I spent all my weekends and time off there. I then ran the family business, which was a grain mill that sold to dairy farmers mostly, but also other feed went out of there also. So I am deeply embedded in the agricultural life. I know the hardship that goes with trying to make a living off the land, but I also feel it's the most rewarding because of what the people that I work with, the people that also share the same values of keeping the Vermont open and so on and so forth. So again, I understand that the push now is for increasing all these small farms and the back to nature type of thing. And it is very important that Vermont have this, we have this, it's not a mystique. We have this aura of being healthy, wholeful, and all that sort of stuff. So we want to keep that going, but we also don't want to lose track of what the large farms are going through also, okay? Be glad to answer any questions that you have.
You have the question for Art? Representative O'Brien?
I just have a couple questions. Back to Amber. So are you part of Fairmont Farms?
Yes.
Okay. So what are you to Tucker, who we had in yesterday?
No relation, just an employee.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Nice. And for Art, I was like, I know Bennington's in southern Vermont, but I could see green leaves out behind your.
Art is in Florida.
That's what I thought.
I'm in Florida.
Right next to Diane Bosco, right?
I wasn't going to narc on you, Art.
So nice in Bennington.
You always call it the banana belt.
Right, exactly.
Other questions for Art? Okay, well, are you you'll stay on the call here?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Amber.
So from Art, we're going to move to Mary. She's going to explain how we develop policy and how we are in a grassroots organization.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Thanks for having us. My name is Mary White. I am the first vice president of the Farm Bureau. My husband and I own and operate a small dairy farm in Orange County. We're in Corinth, and I'm actively milking cows every morning, active on the farm. I also wear many hats. I also work as a farm and crop insurance specialist in all my spare time. So I stay pretty busy, and as most farmers do. So a lot of things to chat about today. And first is really the policy development. I know not a lot of you are familiar with us and really how our grassroots start. So I'm just going to start from the very bare bones beginning of how our organization works. So all of you represent townships and counties. Our organization is structured pretty similarly. So each county has its own Farm Bureau board. And within that county, those boards will meet with members. They're involved in community events. And the farm members within those counties will bring issues to the county farm bureaus and help develop policies that will help them on their day-to-day on the farm. So those policies are then voted on a county level, and then if approved by the counties, the county will then decide which ones to bring to our state annual meeting held every November, where the entire state, all counties represented, will then vote on these policies. So it's a very rigorous process, and it really ensures that all our members have a voice. Everyone is weighing in on these policies and really putting the emphasis on the newer issues every single year. So some policies might be in our book and they've been there. You know, our organization was founded in 1915. They're not that old, I promise you, because we review them every year, but there are some older policies, but we're always bringing new policies in the forefront of farmer issues every single year. So our policy for this book that year that Amber is going to be working on was just developed in November of 2022. So it is very current. Anything that she presents is directly from our county farm bureaus. And I would encourage you all to get in touch with your county farm bureaus if you haven't. They are very active in the communities, and really we can set you up to do farm tours if you wish in your townships, and just get out there and visit the diversity that you have in every single town in Vermont. To the dairy farm milking a couple hundred cows, all the way, you know, to the homesteader, maybe that has one cow or is growing vegetables. Hemp isn't as big as it used to be, but there is still a lot of diversity out there in the agriculture products that we represent. So when Amber brings you policy, it's not something that, you know, she pulled out of a hat. It was something that was strategically developed. And if for some reason an issue comes up and we don't necessarily have a policy on it, we don't just make it up on the fly just due to our rigorous process. So we can reach out to members and have them speak and testify. But as an organization, we really rely on that policy book to represent and make sure all our members' voices are heard. So any questions on that process? Does that make sense to everyone?
Any questions, committee? No, I think we're all set with that.
Okay. So next, I kind of wanted to jump in. I'm really excited that you guys rebranded to include this food resilience aspect to the committee. So I just wanted to start the discussion and I guess hear from you all what that means to you, and just a little bit on how we might be able to help make some of these connections. I know this is a new topic. Well, it's been a very ongoing topic in agriculture, but now it's being really brought to the forefront. So I'd like to just hear from you all what that means and just have an open discussion about it.
Okay, would anybody like to jump in? So I'll start, and if anybody else wants to follow, let me know. But I'll start by saying that we're, in a sense, we're still defining, I think, as a committee and as a body, what it will look like. But generally speaking, and we've heard some testimony so far on how much of the food that Vermonters consume comes from Vermont today, and how that number has changed over the past couple of decades, and how we might want to think about making that number even bigger as time goes on, as the supply chain and just availability of food coming from other parts of the country or the world is less reliable. So being resilient in the sense of making sure that we can do more to feed ourselves is really what we're, I think, talking about. As I said, we're still sort of working on how do we want to think about that and what does that look like. As you know, we've only been in this room since the first, well, this is our third week, and we're not here all day long talking about that particular issue. So it is a bit of a work in progress. But I would welcome other folks on the committee. This might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about that. So if you've got, Representative Lipsky.
Mary, I'm the least farming aware, but what I've learned in the last week or so, it's startling to me because I'm from a forestry and logging, timber harvesting life, is the critical role for farm agricultural resiliency has to do with soil productivity and systems that affect tilling, soil temperature, ability to absorb high volumes of storm runoff. So the sustainability of ag soils is sort of a foundation aspect to food resiliency if it's going to be produced locally in this state with a rather short growing season compared to other regions of the country. And those same principles apply to forestry, remaining sustainable soils and productive soils. They're two interrelated issues, and I gather the same is so with agriculture.
Does that make sense, Mary?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate, and to reiterate those comments that you just mentioned, as a farmer, that's when I think about food resiliency, that is a really key component in moving this system forward and creating something that's sustainable for Vermont, that's going to be here for Vermonters for generations to come. So I really appreciate those comments, and that's right on the line of what Farm Bureau thinks and really what is necessary to start looking at these types of systems.
Representative O'Brien, yeah.
Hi, Mary. One other thing when I think of resilience is that on the dairy task force, I can't remember who was on, but I asked, what is it about Vermont dairy farmers that's different from other states? Like, do we have some advantage in some ways? And everybody said, no real advantage, but the one thing that stood out is Vermont farmers are resilient. So we already have that. I mean, that we're sort of the toughest farmers probably, in the country. And then what's going to come up in here a lot also is succession issues. And so how do we pass that resilience on to the next generation is going to be a challenge for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I can just give some examples. So on our farm, my husband and I are actually the 5th generation. We're a Cabot Agrimark farm. So we've been consistently milking cows on this farm for over 100 years. And, we've always looked at past generations, and his grandfather makes the joke is I was organic before it was cool, because all farms were. And then the science came out and the research, and, we had the 80s and the 90s where a lot of things changed, and there was a dramatic exit from the dairy industry at that time. And now Vermonters are at least 3 generations removed from that traditional family farm. So I think the educational piece is also a part of this. And how do we reconnect the public and the consumers to help them better understand how we develop these programs, where their food is coming from? And the same case, I don't expect the public, I don't expect you all to be experts on agriculture. It's such a vast topic and industry. And just like farmers, we're not policy experts by any means on ourselves. So I think the Farm Bureau can do a really good job at helping bring both of those things together and be a great resource for you all moving forward.
Great. Yeah, we I'm sure are constantly reminded that we're citizen legislators, and At the same time, a number of folks around the table here do farm for a living, and others are deeply involved with food issues and forestry. So we got a nice combination, I think.
Yes, it is. And I always say diversity is great. It's great to see that you all come from different backgrounds and even different interest levels. It really gives different perspectives on the topic. And as we talk about our organization within Farm Bureau, again, diversity is key for us. You know, people used to think of us as a very dairy advocacy group. And again, back in the 70s, 80s, dairy was prominent in Vermont. So we were focused on those issues, but now as our membership has grown more diverse, our board members are more diverse now, we have shifted our policy to meet those needs of all members. And it's really key to food resiliency going forward, the diversity we have, as Art spoke about. You know, the large farms can help, and we say large farms in Vermont, they are not large farms when you look at the rest of the country. But our larger farms help keep the grain store, the equipment places, the other industries that these smaller farms need to rely on, because they can't necessarily support those businesses to keep them in the state. But working together, we can all participate and keep these small businesses here, which has also been an issue. We've seen feed dealers go out. We've seen grain companies shift out of the state. So we really need to make sure that we're supporting our agriculture businesses within the state as well as farmers to keep the system intact.
Good. Any other observations or questions for Mary? Yes, Ron.
Hey, Rodney.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Food resilience on our title now, it kind of ties into what I believe I've been trying to focus on the last session and a half, is that, you know, the climate change, we have the opportunity to grow commodities that we never could in the state of Vermont 20, 30 years ago. And I think that the milk producers are a large part of our economy. I believe that in order to keep land open, productive, we could shift some of these smaller dairy farmers to other commodities, whether it be vegetables, whether it be grains, whether it be, you know, fruits or whatever. I mean, I worked for the post office for a little bit last summer, and I was up in Warren. You'd never believe how many grapes are grown up in Warren.
Yep.
And so the opportunities are there, and I think we could focus on not just dairy, but other commodities and be able to produce more food for Vermont. Right.
Yeah, and I will say, on shifting a little bit on the crop insurance side of things, the more data we can gather on these new crops and report to federal agencies, it can help develop crop insurance programs, because a lot of the risk for farmers right now is some of these newer crops, for apples, for example, in certain counties are not insurable right now because it's not something that's been grown continuously. You know, we have the old Vermont orchards that have been here since forever. But these newer orchards that are starting up, you know, just any data we can gather to help the state assist the federal government in expanding some of these crop insurance programs so farmers can alleviate some of that risk in their operation would be key to helping that diversity grow, as Ronnie just spoke of.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that comment because I think it's a critical piece of when we're talking about resiliency, what it might look like. Other questions or thoughts? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Well, I appreciate your time. I'm going to stay on. So if I need to come back on, that's fine, but we'll turn it over, I guess, back to Amber for now to introduce Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. So now we'll have Joe Tisbert. He's the president of Vermont Farm Bureau. He's going to speak for a little bit.
Good morning, everyone. Joe Tisbert, president of Vermont Farm Bureau and owner and operator of Valley Dream Farm in Cambridge, Vermont. Thank you, Chair. It's great to meet all you folks. I hope to be there in person maybe next week around to see everyone. I am currently traveling back from San Juan, Puerto Rico from our national convention, where I am a national board member of the American Farm Bureau, where we have 6 million members. I am also on the board of the American Farm Bureau Foundation for Agriculture, where we recognize the need for education of all types of agriculture. So I'm going to reiterate a little bit about what folks have been saying, how we are a grassroots organization. We do have members from all aspects of agriculture on our boards in our counties and on our state board. Being an organic farmer and being president of Vermont Farm Bureau is not only maybe a shock to some folks, but it's also an honor for me to be able to spread the word of all of agriculture. So one of the things that I would like to say today is for all of you to understand is that when we support agriculture, we support agriculture industry also, because without the industry, we cannot be successful or sustainable. Farmers cannot be sustainable without making a profit. So we want to make sure that all our farmers are sustainable, that we know that our industry is resilient. We make changes on the fly. If you take into consideration the water quality issue that we had when we had the RIPs put into place, 95% of all the improvements to Lake Champlain come from agriculture. It's farmers doing the right thing for the right to farm their lands and be the stewards of the land that they all are. We have I will speak a little bit about nationally. I'm going to let Amber speak about the state policies. Nationally, Farm Bureau has recently did a memorandum of understanding for right to repair with John Deere Company. We now have the rights to purchase diagnostic materials, parts, manuals, so that our farmers can repair their own equipment if they so choose. This understanding is been 2 years in the process, and it's part of how Farm Bureau works to help our farmers and to work with our industries. Look forward to working with John Deere on all those and our farmers in our state that really have been pushing for some way that they can fix their own tractors when they need to. We are also working with all the other major manufacturers of equipment to try to come up with the same MOU for all of them. So very big deal. Other things that we are working on is immigration reform. As everyone knows, I hope everyone knows, one of the most important things that we need to do is to reform immigration and have reliable labor for agriculture. I will be, in March, I will be on the border in Arizona to firsthand see the issues on the border and how workers are coming across legally, some illegally. We will be able to have a firsthand report once that happens in March. Some of the things that we're working on that we want to see happen this year is the Farm Bill. Very important. This is very important. You know, the SNAP side of this and the resiliency that we need for all folks to have availability of food. SNAP program in this bill is very important and very big deal. It's also a very big deal that the insurance end of the farm bill also has protection for our farmers, that when the increased costs go up, that they can actually be covered for the cost instead of for a portion of the cost. We'll be working on that on the right to farm. Part of that right to farm is the growth of specialty crops for young beginning farmers and vegetable farmers that have a specialty crop that maybe couldn't get insurance in the past, but we need to really fight for their insurance and how they can get it together. So those are the kind of the biggest critical things that we have. I know labor is a big part to all Vermont farms. I personally use the H-2A program, which I feel is unsustainable and not a good process. It's a great process because I get my help, but it's how it's funded, how the government makes their pay scale up. We follow their pay scale. The federal government does the pay scale. We have to supply housing. We have to supply, which is none of that is as important as the farm labor that it helps us have. It's the only way that we could sustain our business. My farm is also going through, I know I'm very young, but my farm is also going through transition. My daughter is becoming part of our farm, and we are working with groups. We are working with third-party groups to show a transition from one generation to another. I am a first generation on our farm. We recently spoke at the National Convention about the transition process and how it works. We use Landia Legacy, that's a free program for all farmers. That's part of Nationwide, that they give free to any farmer. It doesn't have to be a Farm Bureau member. So these processes are all important to us. Getting it right the first time, so my daughter can actually take over and not be burdened. Sorry about that. So we, we're in the middle of this process. It's I'll let you know how it works out. Some days my daughter wants it quicker than others. But these are all programs that Farm Bureau has at their disposal to help us. I want to talk a little bit also about farms. I know as a vegetable farmer, we work with a lot of programs with the food banks. We work with Salvation Farms to give food to the poor. And I know a lot of our farms are doing that to take advantage of, if your crop if you have a spare crop, most of us are all giving to the food bank and to a firm like Salvation Farms. I think it's very important that we in agriculture give back, and I think we mostly all do. Our organization is built on the strength of its members. We don't get funded. We're funded mainly by our membership, and that is how Farm Bureau works. So we have to answer to people. I wouldn't be president anymore if I was going off the rails and not supporting our agriculture. So going forward, I'd like to just say that I know a lot of you, so some new folks on this committee, and I know a lot of you have worked in the past, and I want to just tell you how proud I am of the farms in Vermont for how they step up for climate change. We are part of the solution. Forestry is part of the solution. We need to keep those things going. We need to make sure that, what is the word regenerative? Farm Bureau just came up with a description of regenerative, and it talks about soil health. And all our farms today that are cover cropping, drag lining, anything they did for water quality also helps our climate and sequestering carbon. How do we make sure that we keep these all going? I know that the right to farm is going to be coming up to your committee, and I think it's very important that we figure out you know, what is the right to farm, and how do we protect our farmers? Because if we don't protect them, they will be lost, and we will lose a lot more farms than we've already lost. Let's face it, it's hard to make a living on the farm. It's the best lifestyle ever. I live in the most beautiful spot in America. I've traveled the country to see beautiful places, but I love to come home to my own beautiful spot. And I'm going to tell you that Vermont is the best place to live in the world. So any questions for me?
I see one question here of Supernaut and then others, but we'll start with you.
Hi, thank you so much. I have two questions, but my first is, could you speak a little bit more to the unsustainability of the H-2A worker program? You mentioned housing is challenging factors and pay is challenging factors, and I'm just wondering if you could provide a little bit more context and detail about that.
So, first of all, I love my H-2A because I couldn't survive without it. Secondly it's the affordability of H-2A. The workforce has increased over 28% in 3 years in salaries. That being said, in their part of their salary is their housing, taking them for groceries, to the bank, to groceries. It's to the bank. So right now, this coming year, the H-2A program, our government pay scale that we have to pay is $16.99 an hour plus housing, plus flights, plus the visas and all the costs it does to get here. So that really brings the pay scale up very high, which, you know, you can't do with them. But on the same token, it cuts down on our price, on our case price per case, that we can actually survive further. So the cost of labor keeps going up. However, without it, we can't find enough qualified labor to make the farm successful. So those are the kind of things that it makes it harder to do. Also, the caps, we would like immigration reform without a cap of labor. The dairy industry, I know part of the plans that have been coming up to enhance H-2A is to have year-round workers be able to come. Some of the discussions are 3 to 5 year visas, where they could stay to 3 to 5 years instead of going home. We can keep them now for 10 months. So part of the issue with that is that Farm Bureau doesn't agree with is they put a cap of 20,000 workers. The dairy industry needs 400,000 workers to be successful and to be secure. So we need to make sure that the caps are not. That's what Farm Bureau does. It protects these caps. We'd love to have immigration reform. We're actively on it. We're actively talking to our presidents in the southern states, and just heard at our meeting last week is that the northern border has the same issues with immigration come across, and how it's affecting the northern border, which, living in northern Vermont, I never really feel like we have a problem. But you know, other folks from New York and Wisconsin are all talking about the issues that they have with folks coming over the border illegally. So the H-2A program, as good as it is, it's becoming unsustainable with the increase in cost for it.
I know Representative Templeman had a question, but maybe just before we go to your question, if there are other sort of follow-up questions about labor or
I was hoping to follow up with
please
just one
do.
more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And on that note, that sounds like a really important opportunity to develop a more local workforce. That sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for folks to either enter into that sector or to become part of it. Do you have policies around encouraging folks and doing outreach around getting more help that isn't perhaps dependent upon a fluctuating migrant workforce?
We'd love to have local labor. We're always advertising. We advertise, as part of the program, you have to advertise in 5 states for labor before you're approved to join the program. Locally, we've advertised. I will tell you that in the last 4 years, we may have had one person apply to work on our farm. And that person only applied because they needed to for getting a job. And then when we tried to hire them, they didn't have they couldn't lift more than 40 pounds, which would be a problem on the farm. So if we could find local workers, we'd love to have local workers. The inconsistency of local workers, I know Senator Sanders and I have had a conversation in the past about hiring more high school and college kids. Well, the problem with that in the vegetable business is that in mid-August, they want to go home and we still have a full harvest that has to be done. And now we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We just can't supply that. That labor doesn't really work for us. Not without, that can be supplemental labor, but it can't be the full-time labor force. So we would love to have, I'd love to have my whole family want to be on the farm, but but that's not really realistic. Excuse me. And getting local labor, quite frankly, that with the operation that we have and the commitments that we need, it's very difficult to get someone that is willing to do it. Now, over the years, we've had very good local labor. The best labor that we can get is someone that wants to farm on their own, but you have them for a couple of years and then they're off on their own. And a prime example is on my farm. Knee Deep Farm is an organic farm right up next to Smuggler's Notch. Shane worked for me for 5 years, and his wife Eliza worked for David Marchand and Riverberry Farm for 5 years, or for more than that. She worked for him quite a while. And then they started their own farm. I actually rent them a couple acres of my ground to give them a way to diversify their crops and rotate their crops. So, we want to make sure we have young farmers coming in, but, finding the help and getting good help and commitment from your workforce is always difficult.
Other questions on this topic? Representative Cole?
Okay. Sure. Yes, I think, all around in whichever industry it is, of course, we are struggling with a small labor force and availability of local labor, which totally stinks no matter which industry. But I think with farming, the education piece will be so important too, to get people excited, especially that are new and looking for new career opportunities. And maybe that will be some part of our role too, in continuing to educate folks about how awesome the field is, just like you described, Joe. A question that I had on the H2A piece and in general with rising labor costs and input costs is, do you identify any loopholes or areas that our committee in particular could push to help cover those rising costs in terms of policy?
Well, that's a really good question. Off the top of my head, I couldn't give you an answer that I think would do. I don't think, I think that when I listen to consumers talk, and being on our farm, we also do agritourism. And we also talk with folks from all over New England and actually all over the world. And, the one thing they want to talk about is how expensive food is, right, at the current year. And so when you go to the farmer and you tell the farmer whose costs are increased, labor's increased, taxes increase, everything goes up, then you tell them, well, my food's too expensive. How do we bridge that gap? And I will think about it. And maybe in the next few weeks, I can get back to you with something I think would work. But it's an interesting subject. I don't think I think farmers would just like to be paid a fair price for their product, without being under the scrutiny of saying, oh, you're getting too much money, because most of us aren't. Most of us are trying to make a living, like everyone else. So, I'll think about it, I guess is my best answer.
Thank you.
As a board, as a team, we'll think about it. I don't know if a lot of you know that Vermont Farm Bureau has gone through some big changes in the last 2 years. We have gone from very little staff to now having field staff that is out in the field talking to farmers to get answers from farmers, to get farmers to try to recommit to policy that is so important to keep their business viable. We also have a new executive director in Tom O'Connor. He's doing a great job. And with Mary as our first vice president and Art as our second vice president, there's a lot of great leadership to keep staff going. And then, of course, you're going to be dealing with Amber a lot. I think she'll be outstanding to work with you. I know I'm so impressed with her first few weeks on the job. I think she's going to do amazing, and she will be a great resource, not only to get answers to help you, but it also help us figure out education and how we can work it together to represent all farms like we try to do.
Representative Templeman has a question.
Yeah, Mr. Tisbett, is it possible that you can send a link over for the Farm Bureau's definition of regenerative? I'm really curious to hear what you've come up with there.
I will. I didn't want to get it wrong, and I had terrible notes scratching it in my book. But it all ends up with, I will get it, and I will get it to you.
Thank you.
It's something. I pushed for this regenerative because I know that a lot of folks have a lot of different ideas of regenerative. So we now have a national policy that was agreed on with over 350 delegates at our national convention. And I'm very excited about that because I think that, what is regenerative? And most of our farms are all regenerative if they're doing the cover cropping and drag lining and taking care of their animals and building soil health, and all that is part of it. And I think farms right now are doing a great job with that. And I think the definition is going to help us all understand what regenerative is and how it's going to work to help with climate change and farm securities.
If you would like to, Amber, if you want to send that and any information that you'd like any of us to see to Alora, then she can circulate it to the committee so that we all.
I'll get it from Joe and then send it to Alora. Okay, I'll try to make it quick.
Okay.
So again, I want to say that we represent all sizes and all types of farming. Going forward, some of our priorities for legislation this year, we're looking at current use. We feel that it should be a policy and not a program. We also believe that any major changes to the current use program should allow for an easy out option for the current members enrolled in that program. We also have been working with Jill Remick. There's going to be a new proposal coming out. So we've been working with them, aligning it to our policy to make sure that it will have not a huge impact on farmers. We also are going to monitor some climate control and see what those impacts will be on agriculture and forestry here in Vermont. There's currently no plan for using EVs to move forestry and agriculture products. So we would love to be a part of that conversation moving forward, and we can call on witnesses to come in as needed. And Joe touched on it a little, the right to farm. We're looking forward to working with legislation this year and making sure that all farmers are protected with the proposals that are being changed in there. They've also talked that we worked with other organizations. We've developed a really great relationship with Vermont Horse Council. And last year there was a bill, the water withdrawal bill, H466. We worked in collaboration with the Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. And we were able to get farmers into House and Senate Ag to testify on that bill. And as Mary said earlier, many of our county farm bureaus are active in their communities. Grand Isle hosted a scoop-a-thon during COVID. I believe they did a drive-through scoop-a-thon ice cream. Any of the money that they received went to their local food shelf. Orange County also, they're very active. They did they go to the 4-H Dairy State Show. They get up early. They make all of the 4-H participants and their parents breakfast on the day of the dairy show. We also lost a very dear member to COVID. We partnered with his family, and the donations exceeded any expectations we had. So there was so much monetary donation that we were able to set up a scholarship fund to send students to college that were interested in the ag field. But then we also had so much money left over. We found an ag book, and now that is circulating in central Vermont in his memory. And then we also, as Joe has mentioned, there's been so much changeover. We have field staff and new ideas. In partnership with the Young Farmers and Ranchers, we are putting on a winter workshops. We're kicking it off in February. We're covering topics from grant writing, on-farm stress management, and then the last one will be a field trip on agritourism to Silloway Farm. Super excited about that. A little upset that I probably won't get to partake, but that's okay. And we're also hosting monthly town hall events where our members can sign on with us once a month, talk to us, interact with us, let us know what's going on. We had current use come in as a guest. Andrew Walmsley from American Farm Bureau was going to be on our next one talking about the Farm Bill. And I think that's all I have. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to meet with us today. And we look forward to working with you this biennium. And if you need anything, please reach out.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any final questions. I just wanted to ask Joe, while we still have him, back to the H-2A visa discussion. Do you know how many of your members take advantage of that or participate in that program? And how many across all those who do, how many employees are in Vermont typically in a year?
Typically through H-2A, I've heard numbers. I haven't really checked into it this year, but I believe they were somewhere between 380 and 500 workers in Vermont. And that was fluctuating because one year was like 520 and one year was 380, and it's somewhere in that range.
That's helpful.
We'd like it to be 3,000 or 4,000 workers so that everybody had the same legalization and have the same opportunities that the H-2A brings us. But we just have to figure out a way to make it sustainable.
And I'm sure it varies, but how many workers would be on a typical farm, or how many farms are participating in Vermont?
I wish I had that number for you. I do not, but I will check it out. I believe it's like around 100 farms.
Okay, good. Representative O'Brien?
You would have called?
You can go first if
Okay.
you want.
Yeah, Joe, I just thought, because you're boots on the ground here, but we've talked a lot about agritourism and accessory on-farm businesses. And I know you feed some people your fruits and vegetables up there. So if there are any sort of policy ideas you have that would help on those challenges, we'd be all ears, I think, on that.
So I know that over the last couple of years, we did an agritourism bill two or 3 years ago that I think Farm Bureau supported to give everybody the right to do agritourism. All farms are right to do agritourism. I believe that it's an essential part of it's almost like an insurance policy for farms, is to be able to do some of the things they do, whether it's a burger night, a small amount of weddings or some weddings, or we do a dinner one day a week with a guest chef and during the summer, and that works really well for us. But that's kind of keeps us just a little bit sustainable. And I think as the markets change and we want to diversify the farms, we need to make sure that we're not hindering folks from being able to participate. Now, one of the reasons that we did the agritourism bill a few years ago was that we wanted it to be across the state. So some counties couldn't say no and some could say yes. And so you didn't have the availability in certain towns. That doesn't mean you don't follow the rules and follow the laws and do all that stuff, but you have to do all that in anyways. So things I think we should work on is just to make sure that they're not discriminating against folks that want to participate in these programs. I mean, we talk about all the time about how we want the right to farm with the ability to have our guests see the cows on the countryside or our open spaces or the corn growing or any of this. And part of what we do when we do a dinner is we educate those folks from other places. We actually make them pick some vegetables and tell them they're eating it. So, you know, this is all part of important education to agriculture. All these agritourism, most of them anyways, are doing it. We have policies on what we would do, and I'd probably be I don't have them all right in front of me so that I could actually give you, but you know, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion about whether a restaurant that gets small amount of produce is agritourism and can put a restaurant in a barn and grow a half acre of vegetables. And I think we have a definition of agriculture that we should follow. I like to see that the dairy farms that want to and can diversify, if they make cheese or they make process their own milk, or all these things are very important to agriculture. You know, I mean, I just think we need to make sure that we strengthen the abilities of farms and they can't be discriminated against. Again, not follow the rules, but to have an opportunity to grow their businesses.
Representative Supernaut, and then we'll probably have to stop there just because we're running short on time, but.
Sure. Thank you. We've been hearing a lot about what's happening with organic dairy farmers and the increased rise in grain costs. And I'm just wondering what the Farm Bureau has been hearing from some of your members and how you've been responding to that.
Yeah, I know our outgoing policy director, Jackie, was serving on that. So I can't speak to that. Joe, I don't know if she updated you.
I don't have a clear update. I know the new rules just came out yesterday from USDA on organic. I think there was a piece with the insurance piece, the DMC, dairy margin protection coverage, didn't work well for organic is what we heard. I know we've been in discussions both in-state and nationally on seeing whether that can be adjusted. I will say that I met with Secretary Vilsack just about a month ago. We're actually in October. How they like that? We did a dairy summit in Kansas City. One to modernize the federal milk marketing order, and we brought in over 300 people from processors, co-ops, farmers, all in the same room that Farm Bureau sponsored to try to modernize the federal milk marketing order. So being an organic farmer, I am very sensitive to the needs of organic. You know, as my cost, I believe my costs are 40 to 60% higher because of how we have to do and the tools that we don't use in our toolbox. So yes, grain is, I heard it was coming down, Ms. Supernaut, but I don't have a clear answer for yet, but I will reach out to our Jackie, who's been on that board, and find out and get you an answer.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for visiting with us this morning. Been very informative, and we'll look for that information that we talked about, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you all at some point during the rest of the session. So thank you, Joe.
I want to personally,
Thank you.
I want to personally thank you guys. I am still traveling to get home to Vermont. One of the things that folks ought to look at, I think, is some of these vegetable farms. I heard yesterday of a lot of folks that lost greenhouses that are that you can't insure. And there's no USDA disaster relief help to help them rebuild. So it might be something you want to think about for some of these smaller growers like myself. I lost 2 greenhouses, but without them being glass, they're or some kind of more solid material than plastic, you can't insure them. So it's a problem out there that I think you guys are going to hear some about, and hopefully you can think about that when you're passing any kind of relief.
Great, thank you. Safe travels to you, Joe, and thank you, Marion. Yeah. Great, all right. Well, we've got, thank you, Amber. We've got another witness probably standing outside the door waiting to come in, but why don't we take a few minutes just to stretch, and when we're